Hi, I'm Cailey, a librarian here at Mentor Public Library.
And I'm Meg, also a librarian, and welcome to this week's edition of All Booked Up with Cailey and Meg, where each time we give you a different book recommendation on a specific theme. Today, we're going to be looking at summer cookbooks. So the weather's getting a little warmer out there, thankfully, and we wanted to give you some fun recipes and books to look at that may inspire you.
Yes, and all of the books that we're going to talk about today are available for you here at the library, and many of them are also available online through Libby and Hoopla, free with your library card. Okay, Meg, tell me what we're cooking this summer. What's your first cookbook?
My first cookbook is called Nachos for Dinner by Dan Whalen.
You have my attention. Go ahead.
Yes, I was going to say, go ahead, kid. What else do I need to say, right? It's nachos. Nachos for any and all occasions and really any and all meals. It's a really fun book, surprising sheet pan meals for the whole family. So I like this book because he gives you a little bit of a fun backstory about the origination of nachos. So apparently they were invented in the 1940s in Piedras Negras, which is a little Mexican town right by the Texas border, by a restaurant owner named Ignacio Inaya. And one day, it was like kind of out of business hours. This group came in and they wanted a quick snack. So at the very last minute, he just kind of whipped something out and they named it after his nickname. His nickname was Nacho. So I think that's a fun story for how nachos came about. Yeah. And it has really cool recipes. He describes nachos as having three basic pillars. There has to be a crispy base, usually chips, obviously. The melty layer, which is usually cheese, and then finally the flavorful topper, such as jalapenos. So then he plays around with all those elements. So sometimes he doesn't necessarily use chips and sometimes he does. So it's a fun mix of pretty much anything and calling it nachos, which is a lot of fun to me. So some of the things that you can make in this, we'll start with basic tortillas. So he'll tell you how to use flour, corn, and corn tortillas to make great homemade nachos. Then he will look at all different salsas. So we got pico de gallo, mango salsa, peach habanero salsa, corn. These just all make my mouth water just thinking about that.
Yes.
Right. And then he gets to like different times of the day, like those meals, like appetizers, lunches, dinner types, and even desserts. So one that actually had a really cool picture, which is why I wanted to talk about it, was the cheesesteak nachos. So obviously based on the Philly cheesesteak, and it just sounded really good. Mm-hmm. Another one that's a little more unique, kind of a spin on nachos, were the falafel nachos. So if anyone likes Mediterranean food or falafel, this is, instead of having like little balls of falafel, taking the chickpeas and making them into a fried, almost nacho consistency, so very flat. So I thought that sounded amazing. And then lastly, we got the dessert kinds. So we got raspberry cheesecake nachos, apple pie nachos, and churrachos, like churros turned nachos. So it's like, what else can you say? I could spend like the whole year, not just summer, in this cookbook.
That sounds amazing. I think I've seen that on the shelf here, and I think I have to check it out now, especially because when we talk about summer, we talk about a lot of like parties and gatherings, and how awesome would it be to go to someone's party with like a giant tray of dessert nachos or something.
Absolutely. What's your first book?
Okay, so my first one is Fabulous Modern Cookies by Chris Taylor and Paul Arguin. I know what you're thinking. Cookies don't necessarily scream summer, but hear me out. You know, like I said, you need desserts at cookouts and parties and things too. And I mean, cookies are really just the optimum one because it's handheld and it just gives you that portable option, and also big crowd pleaser, right?
Absolutely.
So this book is a fun new title because the authors really put a twist on a lot of old favorites. They also still keep things really simple, which I love because, you know, I love when I can have a recipe that doesn't take that many ingredients. And they start off first by like explaining a lot of common ingredients and ways that you can substitute things for one another. They also give a lot of tips and talk about some of the tools that they reference throughout the book. They even have tips for how to cut cookie bars evenly, which I think is like a task that is scientific in some manner, because I always wind up with one row that's much thinner or thicker than the rest of them. And so each recipe, they also give a little background on like where this recipe came from, or, what it's inspired by. And they often will provide variations for you to do another twist on this already twisted recipe. And they have, the book is separated into several different chapters, but highlights include bar cookies. So those are going to be like sort of your brownies, your blondies kind of thing. They also have slice and bake, which is something I've not really gone into much. But they have a savory cookie chapter too, which I thought was really interesting. Now, just to tell you a couple of these things that I want to eat. There is one called New School Banana Pudding Squares. Ooh. So this takes a spin on your classic banana pudding and turns it into a cookie bar. And I have some serious banana dessert lovers in my family, so I think this would be a huge hit at a cookout. Plus, it's like a cold dessert too, which I think is not something that we have a lot of that you can bring places. But they use the natural thickness of heavy cream and mascarpone to sort of mimic that pudding texture. And they also use frosted flakes for the crust. See, I have you hooked.
You got me.
And it looks delicious. Another one that looked really good was called OMGs, and that stands for Our Marvelous Gobs.
I love it.
So gob is sort of apparently a Pennsylvanian slang for a whoopie pie. Yeah, I learned that in this book. But so, I have a serious love of all chocolatey desserts, and this one amps up that chocolate factor using espresso in the cookie batter. So seems like a nice light chocolatey dessert. And lastly, I have to mention one of the savory cookies. There is one in here called a cucumber cheesecake everything bagel bar. Whoa. I love every word of that. But also I'm very enamored with the idea of a savory cookie bar, especially one that is mimicking like my favorite breakfast. And it is something that I already have like all the ingredients for at home too. So this is a super fun cookbook that is a dessert cookbook, but also a little something extra. And I think definitely worth checking out this summer. And it's a brand new title, pulled it right off the new shelf here.
Man, those sound heavenly. It's so good. And you're right. Cookies is like probably my favorite thing. So anytime in the summer when I want something sweet, it's probably going to be a cookie. So this is the perfect book. So my next summer cookbook is another newer title, and it's called New Native Kitchen, Celebrating Modern Recipes of the American Indian by Chef Freddie, Bitsoie, and James O. Fraioli. So this book is written by, he's actually a Navajo who is the executive chef at the Mitsotam Native Foods Cafe, which is located inside Washington, D.C.'s Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. So he kind of oversees the recipes for that restaurant, and he's lived like all over Utah, Arizona, a lot of the Southwest states in America. So he has like a firsthand experience of some of those recipes that he looks at. But really in this book, he talks about indigenous nations from all over North American continent, and talks a little bit about a little window into the culture and how these foods, are reflective of that culture. So it's really interesting in that aspect. And then the food, firstly, is amazing. I just love it's 5 chapters, and this is kind of a maybe organization OCD thing, but I really appreciate how the contents at the beginning show not only like each chapter is a type of food, but it also lists the actual recipe. Sometimes they don't do that. So that's my little OCD appreciation of this book. But then to get into it, it's 5 chapters: soups, salads, vegetables, land and sea, and puddings and sweets. So I'll just go over some of my favorites from these categories. So in the first part, soups, there's an Aztec bean and roasted green chili. I just love that. He'll talk about where you can get some of these ingredients. So some of them are traditional things you could probably find at your local grocery store. Some of them he gives you ideas of where you could get some spices and some things. He mentioned you could get like these cool sumac things at Etsy. So he gives you some fun ideas. And then another one is Three Sisters salad with shallot vinaigrette. And this was cool. He talked about what Three Sisters means. So Three Sisters refers to an indigenous planting method where they would grow squash, corn, and beans in a symbiotic way so that they kind of helped and supported each other like three sisters. So I thought that was very sweet and a cool idea. So that recipe obviously looked amazing. And then in the land and sea section, we had pork chops with caramelized onion and prickly pear sauce. So that is something I've never tried. I don't know if you have prickly pear sauce or prickly pears, but it's a little blossom that grows off of certain cactuses. And it has like this dark red, like pinkish color, which is like beautiful. So the sauce makes it look gorgeous. And then lastly, in the puddings and sweets section, he has a chocolate and pinon nut cake. So, and he talks about how that's a combination of modern and traditional. So the chocolate, the indigenous people actually used chocolate way before anyone else. So he'll talk a little bit about that. And then pine nuts and berries. So that's a nice, refreshing one for summer as well. So really love this book. I learned a lot and also was inspired to make some good food.
Yes. I love the idea that, it's also teaching you about the history of this food because, I mean, the food history in general is fascinating. So I think anytime you find out things like that, especially something like going back so far, it's also just enhancing your understanding of the food that we eat every day.
Absolutely.
All right, so my last one is what we would say is, I guess, more of our like traditional summer cookbook. This one is called How to Grill Vegetables by Stephen Raichlen. And the subtitle for this is The New Bible for Barbecuing Vegetables Over Live Fire. And I really have to say, I mean, Bible might be a little bit strong, but it is a sort of all-in-one guide for a lot of tips for how to best grill in general, but also specifically for the vegetables. In summer, I think everything is better on the grill. There's something about that char on the food that just really amps up the flavor and, really enhances what you're eating. And this book, like the last one I talked about, does start off with a lot of tips about equipment and techniques, but he really brings it to the next level. He talks about different grilling techniques, different types of grills, as well as uses for like smoking and what types of wood and things to use for those. The author gives a lot of suggestions with each recipe about grilling the vegetables effectively without losing them between the grates on your grill, which is, a problem in general. There was one technique that I definitely want to try that was used in one of the recipes I liked, which was grilled asparagus with a bagna cotta. And they pin the asparagus together with toothpicks. So it's a sort of waffle technique, kind of makes they called it like a raft, like it makes a raft of asparagus then, in order to make the spheres all like one big piece, and it makes it easier for flipping and controlling on the grill without having one roll into that space between the grates, which I think would be a problem with asparagus. And this also used this simple sauce called a bagna cotta, and it's an Italian olive oil based dip. And I'm really curious to try that because it was basically you dipped the grilled asparagus into this type of sauce, and I'm curious about it. So now I feel like I should try that one. Another one that I thought was really creative too was one called zucchini burnt ends. They used a mandolin to make zucchini ribbons and then skewer that in order to cook the zucchini over the grill. It keeps it from getting soggy. It has some crispy ends to it, and I think would just make a great side dish to any sort of grilled dinner that you're making. There was also talk of grilled pizza dough. which I realize is not a vegetable, but you can top pizza with anything, especially your tasty grilled tomatoes, mushrooms, peppers, any of those vegetables. And the author gives variations on the different pizza doughs that you can use even, and how to best make sure that your dough is like cooked through on the grill, because it would be really easy to overcook the outside and undercook the inside. And finally, one thing that I found really interesting about this book is at the back of the book, there is this alphabetical list of vegetables, like common vegetables, and it has quick tips for you. So rather than a specific recipe, it just has quick generalized, like, here's the best way to grill this kind of vegetable. Here's some techniques you should use for it. And I think that's a good quick reference guide. So like I said, it might not be a Bible necessarily, but I think it's absolutely a really helpful guide for anyone who wants to grill more food. And, just again, made me so hungry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love things that also seem delicious. And at the same time, you don't have to feel horrible because it's pretty healthy because it's vegetables. So that's always a win, So I love it. And it's great for summer. I haven't really grilled much, but you're making me want to. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us for this week's edition of All Booked Up with Cailey and Meg. Spend the summer cooking a little bit, and we hope you use our recommendations to do it. So you guys have a good week.
Yes. And happy reading and happy cooking.
Yes.
Great.